GardenFork Radio is brought to you by the GardenFork patrons. We have some new patrons I wanted to thank: Mike P., Kenneth S., and Mike S. Mike S. is a longtime supporter of GardenFork and also a co-host. Very interesting. More information about becoming a patron is in the show notes of the show. Does that make sense? All right, here we go. Hey, how you doing? Thanks for downloading the show. Welcome to GardenFork Radio. This is me, Eric, and my friends talking about what I hope you find are interesting things, kind of DIY related. If it involves a power tool or maybe digging holes or something, that's what we're doing here, plus some food. Today, my good friend Will from the Weekend Homestead. Hello, sir.
Hi, how are you, sir?
I'm fine. It's good to hear your voice. You haven't been on since the beginning of the season because you run, for people who don't know, Will runs a summer RV resort in northwestern Wisconsin, and you are usually AWOL all summer.
It's actually funny because we were looking, and I think the last time I was on was early April, and I'm like, oh, I'll talk to you next week. Here we are in September.
Well, we do have some phone calls. When you're driving to the Home Depot, you call me sometimes.
Absolutely. That's my therapy. It's a lot cheaper to call Eric than anything else.
So we were going to talk about, we have a list of things. We're going to talk about wasps. We're going to talk about loaning out tools, taking takeaways from running the resort all summer, and whatever else comes up. So ready?
Yeah, awesome. Let's go.
Two of my neighbors called me recently, almost the exact same phone call. Hey, Eric, there's a bee swarm in my yard. I'm like, are you sure they're bees? Yeah. I looked it up. They're bees. Definitely they're bees. And I'm like intrigued. I'm like, one was in Brooklyn. One was in our little town upstate. So the upstate guy, I know him. He's like, yeah, they're on my log splitter. And I'm like, okay. He covers his log splitter with a trash can. And I'm like, well, they could be up under the trash can, you know. And I'm very excited because I'm like, wow, this would make a great video. So I go over there and I'm thinking, who could I give the bees to? Because I don't keep bees in Connecticut anymore. I'm like, who do I know that will want to swarm? And so I pull up and I hop out of the car and I know where his log splitter is in the yard. And I'm like, that's a wasp nest. Oh, really? Oh, I thought that was a beehive. And I'm like, come on, man.
Was it a paper wasp nest? Or?
Yeah. And then the same thing happened in Brooklyn where they're like, oh, you know, the word got around the block. Oh, so-and-so's looking for you, Eric. There's a bee swarm on their brownstone. And I'm like, oh, okay, that sounds kind of interesting, you know. And I go over there and it's a paper wasp nest on the side of the building under one of the, are they called mullions? No, it's basically the part of the window that kind of juts out over the top of the window. I don't know what that's called, but they're beautiful and they're cut out of stone. And these paper wasps, I'm just going to call them that generically, had crafted a beautiful hive. And it's on the second floor of the building. And they're like, oh, Eric, you could get that swarm. And I'm like, no, you're going to call an exterminator. So if you have a swarm, maybe double check online as to what a bee swarm looks like before you call your beekeeper friend.
I'll say, I mean, interesting item on the paper wasp nests, to just use that terminology. If you look online, there's a number of people who sell those. Like if there's one on a stick and it's perfectly taken care of in the fall when they all fly away, or, you know, whatever they do. I don't know what they do. Unfortunately, I'm not an expert on it, but I know that they leave in the fall and a lot in the north. People will go in the woods and find those and cut the sticks on either side and then use them as decorations in your house. And I would think in the middle of the night, going to get a glass of water from the fridge, seeing that in the corner of my living room would make me really nervous, not relaxed. But people use it as decoration.
Well, you could, if you want to do that, clip it off and put it in your freezer for a couple days.
Really?
Because if there's any larvae left, or any worker bees, nurse wasps in there, they'll freeze.
Really? Huh.
Yeah.
Well, either way, I'm going to leave it alone and just leave it over there because that's one thing I just don't want to mess with.
We've seen them up in the trees on, like, we're hiking with the dogs, and I'm like, oh, I'll have to come back and get that. And then the next day I come with some clippers to clip it out of the tree, and then invariably a squirrel has ran through the nest.
Sure.
Or maybe a raccoon, I don't know. But anyway, animal has torn through the nest.
Have bees and yellow jackets been really bad in your area? Because I know around us right now, anything outside, like people can't sit out on the patio or people can't sit, out in the yard or anything like that at the resort because just the little black and white yellow, bees land. They're not bees. They got to be like yellow jackets or hornets or something are just flying around everywhere right now. And for whatever reason, this fall just seems to be worse than ever.
I haven't noticed that, but you're in the middle of the country and I'm on the coast, so I don't know.
I guess my question is I know a lot of people say that you can get these little traps that you hang up that attract them. Have you ever had any of those or used them and seen any success?
I have. It's essentially a sugar trap, and the yellow jackets especially, which nest in the ground, by the way, are attracted to those because yellow jackets will kill a weak beehive, and I've had that happen to me. And they're just brutal, and they'll rip the heads off of the bees. But they do work. You have to realize if you put one out there, it's much like those Japanese beetle traps. You will get more yellow jackets because it's a sweet pheromone that's attracting them. So you're going to have more yellow jackets wherever that trap is. So you might want to put the trap not in your yard, but in the far corner of your property,
Yep. I can guarantee you that I do know that yellow jackets live in the ground. I ran into some about a month ago. So
you going to tell us about it?
Oh, absolutely. No, I was standing there and I was running the chainsaw. I had the earmuffs on and all that stuff and the glasses. And I don't want to say you kind of get in the zone, but you get hyper focused on what you're doing when you have a running chainsaw. You don't think about like what you're going to do next weekend or, hey, look, there's a bicyclist going by. You have a dangerous piece of equipment in your hands and you're going to focus. Well, all of a sudden I felt this pinching on my wrist and I looked and there was a yellow jacket and it stung me right on the wrist. And then I looked down at my pants and I had about 40 of them falling on the outside of my pants. And so you shake them off and then you run and then you have to decide, do I run with a running chainsaw or do I drop it? Because you're somewhat in panic mode. And like the guy running the skid steer is looking at me like I'm a crazy man as I'm flailing my arms around, running around, taking my shirt off. I ended up getting them up under my shirt and them stuck in the fabric of the shirt and got stung probably 6 times. And I'll tell you, those little guys will follow you a long, long distance. I probably ran a quarter mile and I went into a building and they were still following me into the building and got me probably 3 or 4 more times in there. So it's always be situationally aware of what's around you when running a chainsaw, including are you cutting a log that's right over the top of a yellow jacket's nest in the ground?
Yeah, because you can see if you just take a moment to assess the situation. You'll see this yellow flying thing dart into the ground, and you're like, oh, yeah, don't go over there. But
where our issue is we dropped the tree that we needed to drop, and the tree was laying. It must have fell right over the top of the hole. And as we cut the log, I revealed what was underneath. So they're probably pretty angry because we dropped a tree on it, and I was the big beast standing there that they decided, hey, we're gonna go get that guy.
Wow. Oh, you were. Yeah, that was a target. Yeah.
Yeah, I was. There was the crazy part is you look down at your legs and it's kind of like surreal because they're stinging the jeans and your pants and all your stuff that you're wearing, and you don't realize it till they finally make it to the skin. Because when you're using a chainsaw, you want to be fairly covered up. You can't be doing it in flip flops and shorts.
Right.
So, thinking of safety, that stuff saved me from getting it. But then once you started moving around and all that, that's when they got into my shirt, and that was when it went downhill fast. I
was cutting a bunch of sugar maple. I lost 2 sugar maples in a storm last year, and I was, as you say, you're in the zone because you have this machine with a flailing blade on it and a chain, and I'm paying attention. I'm always paying attention to if the output, the shavings, are starting to get dusty because that means your chain is getting dull. And I've been using a chainsaw that Troy Built sent me, and they have been a sponsor of the show. And it's a good machine. I've been using it. I thought, I'm going to use it all summer, and then I'll make a video about it. And you really are just paying attention to the saw and nothing else, to the point that when I got done cutting this one log, I took my I have a helmet with the built-in ear protection and the front screen over your eyes. I didn't realize it was pouring down rain. And then I was like, oh, it's raining,
Is that chainsaw that you got from Troy Built gas or electric?
It's a 2-cycle gas chainsaw. It's got a 20-inch bar on it. They wanted me to make a video on using a chainsaw, which I did. I made 2 of them, one in the spring, one in the summer. And they have chainsaws from, I think, a 14-inch bar to a 20-inch bar. And I have a 20-inch bar steel chainsaw. Yep. And I thought, let's compare these. It was, just to go on a tangent here, the Troy Built saw is $220. My steel 20-inch bar is a $700 saw. So I was curious to compare the two. So I'm still comparing them, and I'll make a video about it this fall. But it cuts wood. It's good. But you really do pay attention when you're running the saw. It's kind of interesting that way.
I will say, I was always big engine, big chainsaw, the bigger, the better, the best you can get kind of thing because we have the 160 acres at the weekend homestead, and now we have the 20 acres at the resort. We have a lot of trees. It's just a thing. So you have to have chainsaws. This year I broke down and bought an electric chainsaw.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest with you, one of those battery operated ones from the Yellow Company, we got the 20-volt batteries or whatever they are on it. I find myself using that thing 10 times more than the gas version. And there's nothing wrong with the gas version, but I think we just cut up. We had a storm come through just a couple weeks ago at the resort, and a couple treetops came down, and none of the branches are bigger than, I don't know, an inch to 3 inches in diameter because it's the top of the tree.
Yeah.
And you just get the electric chainsaw out and zip, zip, zip. It didn't make a whole bunch of noise in the property. Any of our employees can basically use it. It's, you don't have to worry about starting or figuring it all out. You just put the oil in and slap the battery in. And I see we use that thing all the time on the property, and I recommend them. I never thought I'd like an electric chainsaw or a battery powered one, but they've come a long way.
Interesting. Well, we're going to do a whole bunch of stuff about that coming up, so that'll be fun.
Perfect.
So just double check online if you think you have a bee swarm or a beehive. You probably have wasps. A lot of wasps don't even have a paper nest, or they're hornets or wasps. I'm not quite sure the correct term here. I have a door in the basement. It's an exposed basement wall. And between the interior and between the solid door and the screen door there, the wasp will get behind the screen door and make nests under basically the space between the two doors, because there's no rain there and it's an open space, and they're open nests. It looks like comb, but it has it's glued in the center to the wood behind it. So just be careful when you open doors. But if you see something like that, those are wasps. And the best way to deal with those, I think, is the foaming wasp spray that works from about 15 feet away. And do it in the evening, because that's when most of the wasps are back on the nest.
Absolutely. I'll have to look up the name of the powder, but there's a white powder that you can get also. So if they're in the ground or in a wall or something like that, there's a white powder. I can't think of the name of the chemical, but basically just take the nozzle of the container and give it a couple puffs in there. It coats the area, and as they walk in and out of the nest, it carries it in and basically takes care of the rest of the hive. So if you can't get the spray in there, this powder is another option. It's actually something that a professional exterminator told me about when we had some problems at the property.
I wonder if it's boric acid, because for carpenter ants and termites, you can spray boric acid into a nest. Huh.
It's denatured earth. Does that sound right? Or something along those lines?
Diatomaceous earth?
Yes, that's it.
That's used in swimming pool filters.
Oddly enough, but if my understanding is that it's very sharp. It's a very sharp powder, and when they go by, it basically, I hate to say it, but it cuts them as they go by and gets into their open wounds, and then basically it ends up killing the nest. And as they carry it in, it gets on others, and it just kind of compounds on itself, and that's how it takes care of the nest.
Wow, I would have never thought of that.
Yeah, I don't know. There you go. We learned something.
14 minutes into the show, and I learned something.
That's usually how it goes with me, isn't it? We go on a winding path every time.
Okay, I'm going to let you behind the curtain here. I'm building a new pizza oven that uses a brick arch in a 55-gallon drum. And I took pictures of that, and I posted it using the Patreon app to my patrons. So they get an email saying, hey, Eric posted these pictures, and they can read it right in the email, or they can get a notification if they have the Patreon app on their phone or iPad or other device. And that is kind of one of the behind the scenes things that I share with the patrons, because I'm always asking you, hey, become a patron, and you get the behind the scenes stuff. And I'm thinking, well, they don't really know what the behind the scenes stuff is. Is it me tying my shoelaces? No. It's pictures of the dogs and what I'm building on and what is failing. I'm less and less enamored of public social media. I'm more and more loving the idea of the GardenFork crew and people that are kind of like-minded about doing stuff and sharing stuff, but maybe not sharing it with the whole world because, well, the world's a little crazy out there. So anyway, not the usual Patreon blurb. What do you call this? Pitch, I guess. But more information about signing up is in the show notes, or go to patreon.com/GardenFork. Patreon.com/GardenFork. All right. Thank you. So I had some thoughts about loaning out tools, because one of my friends who isn't the handiest guy, but he's trying to clean up his yard, and he's like, hey, can I borrow your lawnmower? And I'm like, okay. And that was 2 weeks ago.
How big of a yard does he have?
Not very big.
I usually ask people, like, what are you going to use the tool for? Because like one of the neighbors said, oh, I need your angle grinder. And I'm like, okay, first off, that's a big metal or a big blade that spins very fast to cut metal. What are you doing with it before I give it to you? Because I don't want to say I want to be the check of safety, but I want to make sure that they're using the right tool for the right job. Because there's a lot of times where they'll be like, oh, I want to do this. And he wanted to cut a cast iron pipe with the angle grinder. And I said, well, actually, it'd be better to get a cobalt blade for a reciprocating saw to do that.
Yep.
It'd be safer and so on. So sometimes when you're loaning out tools to people, ask them what they're using it for, because sometimes people don't understand how the tool works, and you could be handing somebody a tool, they use it wrong and wreck it or hurt themselves. So I always try to do the safety check before I hand something out to somebody.
With this issue, I was more concerned about the friendship. He's a great guy, but I'm just like, look, when you will borrow tools, you return the tool.
Usually with a full tank of gas or a 6-pack of beer. I'm just saying.
Yes, I will not loan my tractor out to anyone except one friend/neighbor, and he is a Subaru dealership mechanic, and then he fixes my Subaru on the weekend. I have a Subaru. And so I've been over to his garage a lot, and I clearly knows his way around tools. And he's got 2 great young kids who are just super energy people. And he's like, oh, I need to move some dirt. I want to plant these trees. And I'm like, well, the tractor's just sitting in my friend's barn. I'll bring it over. And he used it, and then his kids washed it, and then he brought it back full of gas.
Perfect. That's exactly what you want.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, if someone ever asks for the tractor or the skid steer or any piece of heavy equipment, ultimately I'm loaning myself out with that piece, because I would never have someone use something that could seriously hurt or damage property very quickly. Because a skid steer is an awesome piece of equipment.
Yeah.
It's a joystick just like Nintendo, but man, that thing can wreck a lot of stuff in seconds, and you can hurt yourself or hurt somebody else significantly bad. So I would feel obligated to go with my piece of equipment at that point. But if it's a hammer, that's a different story. But depending on how sophisticated the tool is, I might be signing up for helping them with that job.
I've been in that situation as well. This gentleman knew how to use the machine, the tractor, and he was using the front end loader to move topsoil. And so that was perfect. It's like up, down, dump,
Well, let me ask you this, and this is a etiquette question about getting tools from people or giving tools to people. If that tool breaks in the process of that person using it, who pays for that?
Right. Well, that's the thing with my friend who's the mechanic is he could fix it.
Right.
So he's got a garage with a lift and all the tools, and he knows where the Kubota dealership is down the road. So
Sure.
he can just go get the parts. I was floored that he had his kids who were grade school kids who loved the tractor. They washed the whole tractor. I was just like, you can use that tractor whenever you want.
The challenge I have is like one person wanted to use it and they're like, oh, well, we grease it and everything else. And I looked at the stuff that they were putting in and they meant well, but they were using the wrong grease or they were using the wrong oil or those types of things. So
yeah,
the engines and things like that are always a little tricky. You know, if you give me a $5 gas station gift card or $10 one for gas or fuel, you know, that's plenty fine because I'll make sure the right stuff gets in there. Because I had a individual that on the fire department one time, the family was using something and the daughter said that she would fill it back up again. And the unit took diesel and she put regular gasoline in it. And it was, you know, they were just trying to be nice. Hey, I'm going to put fuel in this. And then it caused a huge issue. So
I've been down that road. So yeah, I like the tractor doesn't go to anyone other than this gentleman. And it's also kind of nice since I own it with my friend. People ask about it and I go, you know, I own it with a friend of mine and our agreement is we don't lend it out. And that ends the conversation. So, but I just thought if you borrow a tool, I also have another friend who borrows a couple tools of mine and they always come back dirty. And I'm like, you could just wipe this down, you know?
Yep. Or return it with a blade, like a reciprocating saw. You know, if you take it and you use the blades, you know, return it with new blades or something. Or what a lot of people will do is like if they use a saw like that is go to the hardware store and buy yourself a blade and then use the tool because the $10 blade or $15 blade or whatever it is probably fairly inexpensive versus burning up all of my blades or, you know, something along those lines. So if you're ever doing that, just think of those types of things because the person giving you the tool most likely will give you a tool again if you treat the tool with respect and return it better than it was when you got it and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I think anyone that wants to do projects should buy a wet dry shop vac. That's like tool number one.
Yeah, you have to clean up after you're done working. We should send a note out to all my employees about that. Hey, the shower house looks great, but can we vacuum up the sawdust?
When I had my contracting business and I had a crew, my main job was cleaning up after my crew.
Yep.
And then I realized, you know, I could make a little less money doing this all myself and I wouldn't have to clean up after anybody. And I wouldn't have to pay workers' comp.
I will say this, that I mean, it's not a fault of the guys because I mean, we push forward on a lot of projects at the resort and at my personal property and everything. And there's a lot of things going on all the time. And, you know, we always have the message of keep going, moving forward and just, you know, continue the projects along. And usually when the tools are about to get set down, they're excited to move on to the next thing. And that's when putting the tools away or cleaning up after yourself, those types of things kind of get missed because they're already onto, okay, we just finished building this. Now let's go fix that, you know, that kind of stuff. So I kind of breed an environment of that. So ultimately you're right. A good shop vac is key because it definitely keeps things clean.
I own two of them. I have one in the basement and one in the garage because it's kind of a bulky thing to carry around. So I thought, well, if I just have one in both places, I'm much more likely to use it to vacuum. So
oddly enough, actually, I bought one of those little, I don't know what they are, 2-gallon or 3-gallon ones with a little handle on it that looks like it looks like a little tiny suitcase.
Yeah.
It's fairly small, very powerful, but they work awesome. And actually what we found works really well is like if you're going to cut a hole in the wall, one guy holds the shop vac in his hand with the nozzle where they're cutting and the other guy cuts and it knocks down the amount of cleanup right there. And you know, little things like that. So then you don't have this big, huge, bulky R2-D2 thing following you around. Instead, it's just a little suitcase thing. And I find that going back to the electric chainsaw, going back to, you know, this little vacuum, smaller things that are easy to use tend to get used a lot more than big, bulky, hey, it's a pain in the butt to put the oil and start the big chainsaw. Same thing with the vacuum. If the vacuum is small and easy and can get in and out of places really quickly, I see people use them more than the biggest, you know, 25-gallon R2D2 style, shop vac. So
I love that description.
I can't think of another way to describe it, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, yeah. So I was curious about any things that you can share publicly, interesting behind the scenes takeaways we might not know about running a resort in Northwest Wisconsin. Family friendly.
During a pandemic.
Yeah.
I will say that this year marks another success for the resort. We had a phenomenal year. Rental rates were really good. People coming in from the public, really good. The biggest challenge more than anything else was people had very short tempers this year. It was kind of surprising. And this goes to anybody going into restaurants or staying at a hotel or anywhere. The people that are working at those places are there to serve you, but I like to say not to take abuse. People had really short fuses. It seemed like people went from 0 to 100 if there was an issue, and there was never really a spot in between. Barring that was very, very few and far between. But this year, if you remember last year, we talked about all the different problems that I had with the infrastructure where plumbing had an issue, or we had a problem with heating units and things like that. And we had all these big utility issues. This year, because of all the hard work we did last year, made this year exceptionally easy. I didn't have any water main breaks. We didn't have any units go down. I mean, we had the usual stuff. Like this year, we invested in put Mr. Cools in all of the buildings in the property, which took out all the old heaters and things like that. But we've kind of gotten to this point where I don't want to say we got away from nightmare mode, which was, hey, the water main breaks at 3 a.m, or the sewer line backs up, or those types of things, to, hey, let's get rid of these heaters and put in ones that are more efficient, or, hey, these windows are old, let's put in newer, more efficient ones. It wasn't an emergency. It was more of a aesthetic upgrade or something to save money with energy or just make people's experience better. So I'd say this year was the year of, improvement on the fix-up side that way versus anything else.
So how do you dial back people's frustration? How do you diffuse that situation?
Well, we own a bar. I don't know if you know that or not. Here's a Coors Light.
Here you go.
Here you go. More than anything else, I think people just want to be heard. And I'll be honest, we've talked to all of our employees and our staff, and I tell them, listen to what the person says. I said, if you try to stop them mid-conversation, or if you try to interject, or you try to be combative back, it's just going to continue to escalate. And I think most people, when they're frustrated or have a concern, they want to have their voice and opinion validated and heard more than anything else. And if you stop a person in the process of doing that, it just makes the situation worse. Like, I understand someone parked in your spot on the dock, or that there was an issue where somebody parked their stuff too close, or they mowed the lawn incorrectly or whatever. You listen to their concern, and then, try to make them realize that either the situation's easily corrected and it's not that big of a deal, or that, figure out some way to take care of it. And I think by doing that, it helps the situation a lot. But I always say, again, we also have a bar. So, that also helps.
We have a town fair at our little town, and I'm a member of the Lions Club. If you're looking for a group, a volunteer group that you want to be part of, check it. If you have a local Lions Club, they do good stuff. And we have a food tent at the town fair, and it's not a very big fair. It lasts from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. on Saturday of Labor Day weekend. But we sell egg sandwiches, hot dogs, hamburgers, and French fries. And I make French fries. I just deep fry French fries for 4 hours. But there are sometimes people that are unhappy. Oh, this took too long, or, oh, our food is cold. And all I do? I grab a fresh little tray of French fries, and I'm like, here, I'm sorry, these are on me. And it solves everything.
Yeah, that definitely works. It's more than anything, you're validating, hey, this was wrong. How can I fix it? And that's you can do that in anything. It doesn't. You don't have to have a resort. You could be just out on the street and in a restaurant, and even when you're frustrated yourself with something, or talking to somebody or dealing with something, that thinking about those types of things when you're dealing with that at work or anywhere. It's really, people just want to be validated, and once they've felt like they've had their day in court, then a discussion can usually happen shortly thereafter.
Well, this is so good. We're like diplomats here. We could be on the world stage now solving world problems.
I don't think you want me solving the world problems.
We're just
Get a
going to hand
bulldozer and
people,
bulldoze it.
we're going to hand everyone a beer and a thing of French fries.
Exactly. Hey, speaking of the fair, I don't know if you saw that picture I sent you back in April, but we got a mini donut machine.
Yes.
I still have not gotten it to work properly, but we got a mini donut machine. It's pretty cool.
You know, when I'm really depressed, the chocolate covered mini donuts from the gas station at the rest stop are just an immediate cure.
Nice. Well, if there's anyone who does baking or cooking that listens to GardenFork, please email us. I have a question about how thick the batter needs to be, because that's what our problem is it's either too thin or too thick, and we follow the recipe, and if it's too thin, it makes a gigantic blob. If it's too thick, the donut is probably about the size of a pencil eraser, just tiny. So we're trying to figure out like where the sweet spot is on that, but it's been pretty cool. It's all automated, so it drops them in and they float along, and then the little flipper flips them, and then it flips them a second time, and it's the slickest thing and a lot of fun. But I wish we could get it running the right way, because I think it'd be kind of cool to, on a Saturday morning, just have the smell of mini donuts in the property. And we were just going to give them away complimentary to our campers. So if you camp with us on Saturday morning, the bar restaurant, has free mini donuts for people when they walk up.
I'm gonna use a pun. I'm gonna weigh in here on this, and I think you're better off, instead of doing a scoop measurement, is to measure the ingredients by weight.
Interesting. Okay.
Because the flour or the donut mix has some moisture in it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you weigh the water and the flour or whatever, you'll get a much more exact measurement, and then you can nail this thing down. Interesting.
I'll have to try that, because right now we're doing it by, a cup of this, a half a cup of that type of thing. And it goes so quickly from super thick to overly runny. And then you're playing the catch up game of, well, how much more do I add to make it a little thicker? How much more do I add to make it a little thinner? And then you just can never get it. It seems like if you get it right the first time, when you put it together, it works fine. It's once you start chasing it to thicken it or thin it, you never get there, and you end up wasting all of it.
There isn't a YouTube video on this machine?
No, there's not. Oddly enough, here's the hole in the market, Eric. Let's make a YouTube video about how to run a donut machine, because nothing against the donut machines, but like it shows up. The cord is not attached to it, so you have to wire it accordingly, which is easy because I know how to do that and get the right end for it. But there's no instructions. The instructions say plug in, push button, put batter in, go. That's it. And it's not in English. I mean, you have to look at the pictures to figure that out.
Wow.
And I talked to somebody else, and they said, yeah, a majority of the import small appliance machines that you buy that fall into this category usually don't have instructions or anything like that. That they give you the safety instructions and like how it needs to be wired. But then from there's nothing about operation. And if you look up videos for mini donut machines, it's videos of them working. Like seeing people, like watching the donuts float along and just flip and go bloop, and then people are eating them at the end of the video. But they never talk about, hey, how do you clean this thing, or how do you put the batter in and all that stuff.
Are you making the batter from scratch, or buying a bag of donut mix?
A bag of donut mix. So I stopped at a couple fairs, and of course my wife is, we're there to eat French fries and hot dogs and have the kids ride on rides. And I'm scouting out where the mini donut guy is so I can go corner him and ask him what he's using. Well, we went to the fair here locally, and there was a guy there, and he said he buys this Pillsbury mix. And then I called our rep for, food for the restaurant, and I said, hey, do you have this? They're like, oh yeah, it's a simple mix. Everything's in the bag. You just add water. So I thought, oh, this is easy. I could do that. And I bet you I've used up half of a 50-pound bag, and we still haven't had a good batch.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right. So it's radio@gardenfork.tv if you have an answer to our donut question. Cool.
Nice. I like the idea of weighing it. I never thought of it that way, that it would be probably more accurate than doing the scoops.
Yes. Weigh the water and the mix, and then you can fine tune it.
Interesting.
Huh. Well, cool. Will is going to stick around. We're going to do a after show for the GardenFork patrons, but all of you, if you have any comments, please, radio@gardenfork.tv. Do you have any stories of friends that have borrowed tools and good or bad things have happened? We'd be curious to hear about that, all right? So go out and do cool stuff, come back and please tell us about it, all right? It's radio@gardenfork.tv. Thank you. GardenFork Radio is produced by GardenFork Media LLC in Brooklyn, New York. Our producer is Sean O'Neill. If you need an amazing podcast producer, visit Sean's site, SeanInBrooklyn.com. That's Sean, SEAN, in Brooklyn.com. Our executive producer is Jimmy Goose. For more information about Jimmy and the custom hollow books he makes, visit hollowbooks.com. The music in the show is licensed from audioblocks.com and uniquetracks.com.